Get her off the stage." The words echoed through the auditorium like the snap of a conductor's baton in the wrong place. Cold, final, dismissive. The kind of sentence that doesn't just push someone off the stage, it pushes them out of the story. She's black, she's blind, she'll ruin the Steinway. It wasn't shouted from the back by some drunk in the cheap seats. It came from the wings. From Nathaniel Royce, the name etched into gold plaques at every prestigious conservatory, the man critics called the frozen heart of classical music, a man whose eyebrows could crush careers. And tonight, he had aimed those words at a 15-year-old girl in a plain black dress. The audience didn't gasp. There was no audible outrage, just a few uncomfortable shifts, a few nervous coughs, and then stillness, the kind that happens when no one wants to admit they agree. Ayana Bell stood under the spotlight, alone. Her hand gripped a white cane, not just a tool, but a target. She had no introduction, no publicist, no grand resume. Just that cane, a simple dress, and eyes that stared nowhere and everywhere all at once. She didn't respond, not with words. Instead, she turned toward the piano, a Steinway & Sons D274, black lacquer gleaming under stage light, polished to perfection, valued higher than most cars. She didn't hesitate. She didn't bow. She sat. And the silence thickened. Nathaniel Royce's voice sliced through it once more. "Don't let her play. This isn't a charity concert." Still, Ayana said nothing. Her fingers hovered above the keys, as if asking permission for memories no one else could see. Then, with no conductor, no cue, she played. The first note wasn't perfect. It was raw, cracked at the edges, but it landed like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward, pulling every eye, every breath, every judgment into its orbit. And for a moment, the world forgot to blink. This isn't the story of a prodigy with perfect pitch and 10 years of elite training. This isn't a tale of struggle polished into applause. It's about a sound that had no place on that stage until it demanded one. Because Ayana Bell didn't play to impress. She played because it was the only language the world hadn't stolen from her. What followed that night wasn't just music. It was indictment. It was redemption. It was a girl, invisible, underestimated, unwanted, making the most sacred space in the music world fall to its knees without ever asking them to. And the irony, they almost missed her entirely. Just weeks before, that same girl was sitting outside classroom doors in a school that refused to call her a student. Just weeks before, she was playing invisible concertos in an empty hallway, with nothing but memories and muscle memory. No lessons, no spotlight, no applause. But tonight, under the chandeliers of the Harmonique Theater, in a rehearsal meant only for the elite, Ayana Bell showed the world something it had forgotten. That music isn't about reputation, or technique, or tradition. It's about truth. And that night, her truth spilled out in every imperfect, breathtaking note. She didn't play Bach or Beethoven. She played memory. She played isolation. She played the sound of doors slamming, of laughter behind her back, of fingers tracing the outline of a piano she was never allowed to touch. She played the silence between the notes, and taught everyone what it meant to listen. People would say later that the room changed when she played, that the air got thicker, that the floor vibrated, that the lights dimmed, though no one touched the switch. But it wasn't the room that changed. It was them. For the first time in years, they weren't hearing music. They were feeling it. And that, they would later say, was the moment everything began. But for Ayana, it wasn't a beginning. It was a reply. A response to every time she'd been ignored, excluded, pitied, or passed over. She didn't need their permission. She only needed them to stop talking long enough to hear her. And so the girl who wasn't invited to the stage took it. The girl who wasn't asked to perform played. And the girl they tried to erase became a sound they could never forget. This is not just her story, it's our reckoning. Because somewhere along the way, we stopped listening to the quiet ones, and Ayana Bell, blind, black, unknown, reminded us that the softest voices often carry the deepest truths. Now the only question that matters is this: what did you hear when she finally played? Before the world heard her play, before the lights of Crescendo Hall bathed her in gold, before millions stood in stunned silence, Ayana Bell was just the girl no one noticed. She arrived at Eastbrook Conservatory on a Tuesday morning in February. Snow falling like sifted chalk. Cold that wrapped itself around your fingers and didn't let go. No one was waiting for her. No welcome sign, no orientation. Just a white van from social services and a cracked suitcase barely holding together with duct tape. Inside that van sat a 13-year-old girl, dark-skinned, blind since birth, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big, one hand holding a battered Braille reader, the other gripping a white cane that had been snapped and repaired more times than she could count. Eastbrook was a place where talent was curated like fine art, where surnames were more valuable than skill, where children of ambassadors, CEOs, and Grammy winners studied sonatas before they learned multiplication. Ayana? She wasn't even on the official roster. She was admitted under something called the Silent Observer Program, a fancy phrase meant to make exclusion sound like an opportunity. She wasn't allowed to join classes, couldn't touch the instruments, wasn't scheduled to perform. She was there to watch, except she couldn't see. So she listened. Every day, Ayana would sit outside room 2B, the room where Professor Harold McCain taught advanced harmonic theory. She couldn't see the chalk on the board or the students at the Steinway inside, but she could hear every single note, every footstep, every sigh. She memorized the sound of McCain's shoes, one heel slightly heavier, tapping out rhythm like a metronome on marble. She learned when he was frustrated, his pacing slowed. When he was proud, he whistled under his breath just once. She couldn't see the piano keys, but she could feel them in her mind. She would press invisible notes onto her thigh as the students inside played, draw staff lines in the air, reconstruct entire compositions from memory, in silence, in darkness, in a hallway no one cleaned. Most days, students passed her like she was part of the wallpaper. Never cruel, not directly. They just didn't look at her. And when people refuse to look at you long enough, you start to wonder if you're even real. But Ayana never stopped listening. She'd count footsteps down the hallway to build rhythm in her head. She'd lean her ear against the wooden door to feel vibrations. She learned where each key on the grand piano sat. Not from sight, not from touch, but from how the notes moved the air around her. And when she returned to her tiny dorm room, the one reserved for non-students, she wouldn't cry, she wouldn't scream, she would replay everything. In her head, with her hands, in silence. There were moments that cut deeper than sound. Once, she walked into an empty practice room at night, thinking it was vacant. But inside stood Colton Devereux, son of a senator, future star of the department. He turned, sneered. "Oh, I didn't know the school started keeping pets." Laughter from the others. Ayana didn't respond. She didn't beg or argue. She just stood there, hand resting on the edge of the piano, then quietly turned and walked away. That night she didn't sleep. She sat cross-legged on the floor of her room, tracing the shape of a G minor chord on the wooden floor. Not to prove anything. Just to remind herself that music didn't belong to them. It belonged to the ones who needed it. Even the dorm supervisor, Janice Kettering, once told her gently, Ayana, you have to understand, this is a school with a certain image. You don't want to make others uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. The word was always delivered with a smile, but Ayana could hear the blade behind it. She withdrew further, spoke less, walked slower. She learned how to disappear into plain sight, but she never stopped listening. And in the shadows of Eastbrook, something began to form, not resentment, not revenge, resonance, a way of hearing the world that no professor could teach, a way of understanding emotion, not through faces but through breath, through tension, through silence. She didn't need a classroom. She had found her music in the gaps no one else paid attention to. And then, one rainy evening, the door to room 2B opened. Slowly. Professor McCain stood there, his class long over, the lights low, and he saw her, not as a shadow, but as something else. He didn't speak at first, just stood silently, listening to her hand hover in the air, tapping out an invisible rhythm, fingers dancing over memories. And then he said just one thing. "Are you listening to my lectures?" She paused, then nodded. "I'm trying to visualize the fugue." He didn't correct her. He sat down beside her, and with that, something began. Not a lesson, not a mentorship, a quiet rebellion. After that rainy evening outside room 2B, something changed. Not in the curriculum, not on paper, not in the administration's files, but in the silence between Ayana Bell and Professor Harold McCain. They never announced it. There were no schedules, no permission slips, no school credits attached. Yet every week, when the hallways emptied and the students retreated to dorms or cocktail receptions, Ayana would meet McCain. Not in the Steinway room, not in the performance hall, but in the basement. A forgotten practice room where the wallpaper peeled, the air smelled like dust and mildew, and an old upright piano sat with chipped ivory keys and a squeaky pedal. There, in that dark, cold room, music began to breathe. McCain didn't teach her the way he taught others. There were no worksheets, no scales, no theory books. He didn't need to. Instead, he told her stories. "A fugue," he said one night, "is not just a form. It's a pursuit. A soul chasing its own shadow until it finds itself." He would tap rhythms on her wrist, trace invisible notes on her palm, show her how to place her fingers to feel the wood vibrate when a chord rang true. He didn't say, "This is C major." He said, "This is the sound of sunlight on an empty floor." And Ayana absorbed it all. Not just fast, but completely. She never needed to hear something twice. She didn't memorize. She embodied. Her body became the staff. Her pulse kept time. Her breath adjusted tempo. Her silence, that was her conductor. McCain watched with awe. Not because she was gifted. He had taught gifted before. What struck him was the truth in her sound. She didn't play to impress. She didn't play to win. She played because it was the only thing that had ever loved her back. And so, in that room, they formed something more powerful than any lesson. A pact. He didn't try to save her, and she didn't try to prove herself. They met as equals, bound by something unspoken, music not as performance but as language. But outside that room, the world remained unchanged. Rumors spread. "She's not even a real student. I heard McCain's wasting time teaching that girl. They're saying she might audition for something. Ridiculous," the faculty whispered. The department chairs frowned. And then came the meeting. Clarence Langford, head of the piano department, former darling of Royce, known more for pedigree than performance, called McCain into his office. He poured a cup of tea, didn't offer one. Then leaned back in his chair, smiling tightly. "Harold, we admire your passion, but Eastbrook is not a place for projects. What you're doing is admirable. but it could hurt the conservatory's reputation. The word hung in the air. Reputation. McCain said nothing. Langford added, "This isn't a rescue mission. We train performers, not symbols." When McCain left that office, he didn't speak of it again. He simply continued the lessons. And Ayana never asked. But something had shifted. Ayana began composing, not on paper, not on screen, in air. One night, she walked into the basement room ahead of McCain, sat at the piano, and played, not Bach, not Rachmaninoff, a piece of her own. It started with a single high note, held just too long. Then a descending melody, unbalanced, imperfect, but achingly human. When McCain entered, he froze. She wasn't just repeating what he'd taught. She was reflecting him back to himself, his regrets, his solitude, his buried longing to be heard not as a teacher, but as a man who still believed music meant something. He sat beside her, didn't speak. For the first time in decades, Harold McCain cried during a lesson. She didn't comfort him, she just played. And so, in the shadows, Ayana's music grew, not louder, not more complex, just deeper, fuller. She learned how to express silence, how to speak without sound. And then, one night, McCain made a decision. He submitted her for the Young Virtuoso Showcase, one of the most competitive audition programs in the country. No photo, no pedigree, just a single recording. Ayana playing an improvised piece she had called Not Asking. In the submission description, he wrote, "Ayana Bell, 15 years old. She doesn't read music because she hears it before it's written. And what she plays is not for the stage, it's for those who have forgotten how to listen." He didn't tell her he'd applied, because deep down he knew the world wasn't ready, but Ayana was. The invitation to audition came in a plain envelope. No gold foil, no embossed seal, just a printed line. "You have been scheduled for a pre-selection audition at 7:45 a.m. in room B07. No welcome, no instructions, no panel of judges. It was a slot no one wanted, a silent rejection wrapped in technical acceptance. Auditions usually took place in the main hall, with full panels, lights, cameras. But Ayana's, it would happen in a room meant for storage, with a broken upright piano and one unnamed evaluator. She didn't flinch. On the morning of the audition, she woke at 5 a.m., dressed quietly. Picked up her white cane and the cracked braille reader she never used during performances. Beside her, Professor McCain walked in silence, his breath visible in the cold air. When they reached the door, he stopped, his voice low. "This isn't for them to choose you. This is for you to decide if you need them." Ayana nodded. Inside, the room buzzed with fluorescent lights. The piano wheezed when she pressed a key. The judge, a man in a gray shirt with thin glasses, didn't say his name. Didn't shake hands, just scribbled something on a clipboard and nodded for her to begin. Ayana sat. No warm-up, no deep breath. She placed her hands on the keys, not like a performer, but like someone reaching for something that only ever existed in dreams. Then she played. Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece with both muscle and meaning, dark chords, sudden attacks, aching resolve. Her right hand danced with urgency. Her left hand struck like a truth long buried. Her eyes, clouded white, were closed not because she couldn't see, but because she was listening harder than anyone else ever had. The judge didn't look up once. When she finished, the room was still. No applause, no comment. Just a brief nod, a few pen strokes, and then, "Thank you." He left before she stood. Ayana remained seated for a moment longer, not waiting for approval, but to hear the final echo, as if asking, "Did I speak loud enough?" She didn't know that in the corner behind a janitor's cart, Someone else had watched everything. Mr. Richard, 62, salt and pepper hair, the conservatory's janitor for nearly 20 years. He had mopped floors where Yo-Yo Ma once performed, changed light bulbs in halls named after billionaires. He didn't understand harmony, but he knew truth when he heard it. As Ayana stood to leave, he reached into his coat pocket, pulled out an old phone, quietly hit record. He caught only the final 3 minutes of her performance, and her stillness afterward. He didn't add commentary, didn't edit. He uploaded it to a small classical music forum he'd joined in the early 2000s. The title was simple: Blind Black Girl Rejected by Conservatory, plays Rachmaninoff from memory. No thumbnail, no hashtags, just raw. Ayana never saw the video, because the next day she received her rejection. Thank you for your participation. Unfortunately, you have not been selected. No explanation, no feedback, no second chance. McCain folded the letter in half, then again, and placed it in a drawer. He didn't tell her, she didn't ask, but the world, oh, the world, had already started listening. The video had only a few views at first, then 100, then 1,000, and then something happened. An Argentine pianist named Marcos Viala, who had lost his left hand in a car crash, shared it with 5 words. I cried. I don't cry often. A Japanese sound artist posted, She doesn't need to see the keys to find my soul. Then came a retweet from a music blogger in Berlin. If Eastbrook rejected this, the problem isn't her eyes, it's theirs. By the 3rd day, the video had crossed 3 million views. No marketing, no influencers, no press, just feeling, just truth. The comments poured in. She plays like she's bleeding through the keys. This isn't a performance, it's a prayer. Who is she? Ayana Bell, the girl they had placed in a broken room at dawn, was now being discussed in global music forums, Reddit threads, underground jazz bars, and conservatory alumni groups. The irony? The school still didn't notice, but the world did. In that moment, for the first time, the story was no longer about whether Ayana belonged in their hallways. It became about whether those halls ever deserved her to begin with. Crescendo Hall stood like a cathedral of sound. Velvet curtains, chandeliers like frozen rain, and a stage where legends had performed for over a century. And tonight, for the first time, a name not bred from prestige, but from pain, would open the World Harmony Gala, Ayana Bell. No one could quite explain how it happened. Was it the viral video, the flood of international press, the calls from orchestras, artists, and conductors begging the gala committee to listen? Whatever it was, it led to a single decision. She would open the night. Right before Nathaniel Royce, the very man who once demanded she be removed from the stage. When Royce received the updated program, he nearly laughed. A blind black girl with no conservatory training. Opening before me, he muttered. His manager tried to soften it. They say her video has over 30 million views. She's become a symbol. Royce's eyes narrowed. Then, let her symbolize. But I don't follow an opening act built on sympathy. He demanded a meeting with Gerard Monroe, the French artistic director known for arranging concerts for presidents and monarchs. Monroe's reply was simple. You may withdraw, Mr. Royce, but she will not. And for the first time in decades, Nathaniel Royce felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Because deep down, beneath his tailored arrogance, he knew. Symbols don't fade, they echo. Ayana arrived at the hall hours before the performance. No entourage, no makeup team. Just her white cane, her black dress, and the old wooden flute her mother once played to lull her to sleep. Professor McCain stood beside her. holding nothing but a folded coat and years of belief. She touched the fabric of her dress and smiled. "It doesn't need to sparkle," she whispered. "Just sound right." As the velvet curtain parted that evening, and the lights dimmed across Crescendo Hall, the announcer's voice rang out, "Ladies and gentlemen, opening tonight's Gala of Human Harmony from the United States, Ayana Bell." She walked barefoot onto the stage, each step deliberate, each echo of her heel like a soft drum announcing not arrival, but resurrection. There was no orchestra behind her, no conductor to guide, no sheet music, only silence. And a Steinway and Sons D274, the same kind Royce once said she wasn't worthy to touch. Ayana placed her cane gently to the side. Saturday. Her fingers hovered above the keys like they were remembering an old friend. Then, without prelude, she played. Not Bach, not Chopin, not anything the program had predicted. She composed, live, raw, in front of thousands. The first note rang out like a sigh that had waited years to be heard. Then came a cluster of chords, sharp, unbalanced, aching, like memories she couldn't speak aloud. Her left hand thundered through the bass like footsteps in a hallway where she was never welcome. Her right danced across treble notes like laughter she never joined. It wasn't perfect, it was honest. Technicians paused their tasks. The light operator forgot his cue. Royce, in the wings, stopped breathing. Because it wasn't music. It was indictment. It was Ayana laying bare every rejection, every closed door, every insult, not with words, but with vibration. Then, she paused. Silence. 3 beats. Enough for every heart in the room to remember its own failure to listen. And then, with trembling hands, she reached for her wooden flute. She didn't stand. She lifted the instrument to her lips, turned slightly toward the open air, and played. Not a melody, not a tune, a memory. The sound was soft, uneven, like the hum of a lullaby a mother forgets halfway through because she's crying too hard to finish. But in that moment, every person in that room felt something they hadn't in years. Not awe, not admiration. Guilt. Because they realized the stage had never needed chandeliers. It had needed her. When Ayana played her final note, which wasn't a note at all, but a breath, she lowered the flute, placed her hands in her lap, and bowed. Not to the crowd, but to the silence that had shaped her. No one stood, not immediately, because no one could. They sat in the wake of something larger than talent, something unrepeatable, something true. And then, slowly, they rose, one by one, not to applaud, but to apologize. Backstage, Royce said nothing. He no longer saw a blind black girl. He saw the thing he had lost long ago, authenticity. And when the director asked, "Ayana, was that your gala performance?" she smiled. Number that was just the warm-up. The morning after the gala, headlines circled the globe. The girl who played the world silent. Ayana Bell doesn't perform, she reveals. Blind, black, uninvited, unforgettable. The official video of her performance was uploaded to the gala's channel. Within 24 hours, it had over 5 million views. Music forums lit up. Symphony conductors posted reaction clips. Jazz legends called it a spiritual reset. Bloggers wrote essays. A-list celebrities tweeted about crying, not because of the music, but because of what they had felt. Record labels reached out with million-dollar contracts. Talk shows lined up interview requests. Documentary filmmakers begged for exclusive rights. But Ayana Bell? She didn't answer. She didn't open her phone, didn't attend press conferences, didn't return to the stage. She and Professor McCain quietly checked out of their Boston hotel before sunrise. No limo, no publicist, no farewell. Just a suitcase, a white cane, and an old wooden flute. Their destination, Salzburg. To a small wooden house nestled in pine forests, no Wi-Fi, no visitors, no mirrors. There, Ayana began to write, not words, not a book, but music, not to sell, to give. She wrote pieces on handmade paper, in Braille, with ink made from ground berries, no tempo markings, no page numbers, no titles, just music. Then she mailed them, one by one, to names she found in the letters she never expected to receive. A prisoner in Georgia, a girl in a children's cancer ward in Vietnam, a young man with autism in Belgium, a father with dementia who no longer remembered his daughter's name. She never added her name, just one sentence, embossed in Braille at the bottom of each page. Listen with the part of you where language has been forgotten. People didn't perform her pieces for audiences. They performed them for each other. In hospice centers, in refugee camps, in subway tunnels, in small kitchens with makeshift instruments and shaking hands. In Ghana, a group of street drummers created a rhythm called Ayana Pulse, a pattern with more silence than sound. In Iceland, a hospice nurse found a handwritten score under a patient's pillow. It read, "For those who once sang but no one listened." A child in Canada, born deaf, learned to play Ayana's music through vibrations in her fingertips. When asked how it sounded, she smiled and said, "It sounds like I'm not alone." No magazine ever captured Ayana's new life. But stories spread. A girl with a cane teaching children in Nairobi to spell their names with melodies. A score left under a bench at a Lisbon train station, titled only, "For Those Still Waiting." And then came the news. The Royal Council of Arts, the most prestigious body in the world of classical music, announced a once-in-a-decade award, the Artisan Prize. But this time, they renamed it the Ayana Bell Honor. Given not for fame, not for flawless technique, but for changing the way the world hears. At the ceremony, Ayana appeared barefoot. No makeup, no fanfare. She didn't give a speech. She bowed, not to the audience, but to the empty space between them. Then played a single note on her flute, held it, let it fade, and left. No cameras followed, because they didn't need to. Her presence was no longer on stages. It was in the way people paused before playing, in the way teachers let their students sit in silence, in the way the world finally began to ask not, "What do you hear?" but "What did you feel?" At Eastbrook Conservatory, where Ayana had once sat outside closed classroom doors, a new wing was opened, the Bell Wing. No portraits, no velvet ropes, no nameplates, just an open courtyard. And on its walls, in raised braille, "Silence is not the absence of sound. It's where everything waits to be heard." Ayana never returned to Eastbrook, but she was everywhere. In every first note struck by a hand that once trembled. In every pause held a moment longer, not out of fear, but reverence. In every musician who finally believed they didn't need permission to play. And so, the girl they tried to erase became the sound that wouldn't stop echoing. Not for fame, not for applause, but for one reason only: to remind someone, somewhere, that they are no longer invisible.